The stars had always been kind to the Volanti people, and for 12,000 years, they had spread across their corner of the galaxy, like gentle gardeners tending to a vast cosmic garden. They were insectoid beings with shimmering carapaces of deep blue and purple, and their compound eyes could see beauty in wavelengths that other species could never imagine. They had built their civilization on 3 simple principles: trade freely, speak honestly, and never raise a weapon in anger. War was something they read about in ancient texts, something primitive species did before they learned better, something that belonged to the dark ages of galactic history. The Volanti had no warships, no soldiers, no generals. They had merchants and diplomats and artists and scientists, and that had always been enough. Until the Kreeth came. Nobody knew where the Kreeth swarm originated, but the best theories suggested they came from the void between galaxies, from the cold dark spaces where no stars burned and no life should exist. They were hunters, predators of the worst kind, and they consumed entire civilizations the way a fire consumes dry grass. Their ships were black and organic, grown rather than built, and they moved through space in massive fleets that blocked out the light of stars. Their warriors were eyeless creatures with too many limbs and mouths full of razor teeth, and they knew nothing of mercy or negotiation or surrender. The first Volanti colony to fall was Tessara Prime, a beautiful world of crystal forests and singing rivers. 8 million Volanti lived there, and within 3 days, not a single one remained alive. The Kreeth did not take prisoners, and they did not respond to diplomatic channels. They simply killed and consumed and moved on to the next target. High Coordinator Silithan received the news in her chambers on the Volanti homeworld, and for the first time in her long life she felt the cold grip of true terror. She was old by her species standards, nearly 200 years, and her carapace had faded from brilliant purple to a dignified silver. She had guided her people through economic crises and natural disasters and political upheavals, but she had never faced anything like this. "How many ships do they have?" she asked her military advisor, a younger male named Commander Vreth. Vreth's antennae trembled as he displayed the sensor data on the holographic screen. Our scouts counted over 4,000 warships in their main fleet, High Coordinator. There may be more coming from behind. And our defense forces? We have 600 patrol vessels, most of them designed for customs inspection and emergency rescue. We have no weapons that can penetrate their hull armor, and our shields cannot withstand their attacks for more than a few seconds. Silithan closed her compound eyes and tried to think. Every option seemed impossible. Every path led to extinction. Every hope crumbled to dust. Her people had spent millennia believing that peace was always the answer, and now they would die for that belief. "There must be someone who can help us," she whispered. Vreth hesitated, his mandibles clicking nervously. "There is one possibility, High Coordinator, but I am reluctant to suggest it." "Speak freely." "The humans." The word hung in the air like a bad smell. The humans were newcomers to the galactic community, having achieved faster than light travel only 3 centuries ago. They were mammalian bipeds from a small blue planet called Earth, and they had earned a reputation that made other species avoid them. The humans were violent. They had spent most of their history fighting wars against each other, developing increasingly terrible weapons and finding new and creative ways to cause destruction. Other species whispered about them in fearful tones, calling them the Mad Apes or the Death Worlders, or simply those dangerous creatures from the Orion Arm. They had joined the galactic community and signed the peace accords and established trade relationships, but everyone knew what they truly were. They were predators wearing the mask of civilization, wolves pretending to be sheep, and most sensible species kept their distance. "The humans," Silithan repeated slowly. "You want me to invite the most violent species in known space to our doorstep? They are the only ones with military forces, capable of fighting the Kreeth, Vreth replied. I have studied their fleet compositions and their weapons technology. They are terrifying, High Coordinator. Absolutely terrifying. But they might be our only hope. Silithan stood and walked to the window of her chamber. Outside, the capital city spread across the hills in elegant spirals of white stone and living crystal. And beyond that, she could see the purple forest that had taken centuries to cultivate. All of it would burn if the Kreeth came here. All of it would be lost forever. Contact them, she said finally. Send a formal request for military assistance. Offer them whatever they want in return. The message traveled across the stars at faster-than-light speed, reaching human space within hours. Silithan waited for a response, expecting negotiations and demands and complicated diplomatic procedures. She prepared lists of trade concessions and territorial agreements and technological exchanges. The human response arrived the next morning, and it was shockingly simple. Request received and accepted. 3rd Reserve Fleet dispatched to your coordinates. Estimated arrival time, 47 hours. Hang tight. That was all. No demands, no negotiations, no lengthy discussions. Just a simple agreement to help. Silithan read the message 3 times, unable to believe it was real. She had expected the humans to ask for something in return, to leverage her desperation for their own gain. Instead, they had simply said yes. Perhaps we have misjudged them, she said to Vreth. Perhaps the humans are not as terrible as the stories suggest. Vreth did not look convinced. Or perhaps they simply enjoy fighting so much that they require no other payment. Silithan chose to ignore that possibility. For the first time since the Kreeth invasion began, she felt something like hope stirring in her chest. Help was coming, and maybe her people would survive after all. She began preparing for the arrival of the human fleet, imagining massive warships bristling with weapons, crewed by hardened warriors ready for battle. She pictured hundreds of vessels darkening the sky, a show of force so overwhelming that even the Kreeth would hesitate. She had no idea how wrong her expectations would prove to be. The humans were indeed coming, but what they were sending would shake everything Silithan believed about strength and weakness and the true nature of power. In 47 hours, she would learn a lesson that her species had never needed to learn before. Sometimes the most dangerous force in the universe does not look dangerous at all. 47 hours passed like a fever dream for High Coordinator Silithan, and she spent most of that time in the command center, watching the long-range sensors and praying to whatever gods might be listening. Reports kept coming from the outer colonies, each one worse than the last. The Kreeth had destroyed 2 more worlds and were pushing deeper into Volanti space. Millions more of her people had died, and millions more would die unless help arrived soon. When the sensors finally detected incoming ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel, Silithan rushed to the main display with her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. The human fleet had arrived. The sensor officer counted the contacts and then counted them again, his antennae drooping with each pass. How many? Silithan demanded. 12, High Coordinator. 12 squadrons? No, High Coordinator. 12 ships. Just 12 individual ships. Silithan felt the hope drain out of her body like water from a broken vessel. 12 ships against 4,000? This had to be a mistake. Surely the humans had sent more forces, and these were simply the advanced scouts. Are there more coming behind them? She asked desperately. Negative. Long-range sensors show no additional contacts. This appears to be the entire fleet. Commander Vreth pulled up detailed scans of the human vessels, and what he found made the situation even worse. The ships were old, some of them showing battle damage that had never been properly repaired. Carbon scoring marked their hulls, and several had mismatched armor plates that suggested hasty field repairs. The largest vessel, which the database identified as ISV Perseverance, was a 60-year-old heavy cruiser that had been officially listed for decommissioning. 2 of the smaller ships were training corvettes, and 3 others were classified as reserve patrol craft meant for border security rather than actual combat. "This cannot be right," Reth muttered as he studied the data. "These ships are antiques. Some of them belong in museums." Silithan stared at the display in disbelief. She had asked the most powerful military force in the galaxy for help, and they had sent her a collection of rust and memories. Was this some kind of joke? Were the humans mocking her people in their darkest hour? "Open a communication channel," she commanded, her voice cold with barely controlled anger. The view screen flickered to life, revealing the bridge of the Perseverance. What Silithan saw did nothing to improve her mood. The human commander was a female with gray hair and deep lines on her face, clearly old by human standards. She wore a uniform that looked worn but clean, and she sat in her command chair with the relaxed posture of someone who had absolutely nothing to worry about. Behind her, the bridge crew moved about their tasks with casual ease. Some were very young, barely adults by the look of them, and they chatted and laughed among themselves as if this were a pleasure cruise rather than a military operation. "I, Coordinator Silithan," the human woman said with a slight nod of her head. "I am Admiral Catherine Okonkwo, commanding the 3rd Reserve Fleet. We received your distress call and came as quickly as we could. Apologies for any delay." "Admiral Okonkwo," Silithan replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. "I must ask for clarification. Our sensors show only 12 vessels in your fleet. Surely there are more forces en route." The Admiral shook her head with an apologetic smile. "I am afraid this is what we have, Coordinator. We were running training exercises in the outer colonies when your call came through, and Command decided we were closest to your position. It made sense to send us rather than pull a frontline fleet away from their stations." Training exercises. They had been running training exercises. Silithan could not believe what she was hearing. "Admiral, perhaps you do not understand the severity of our situation. The Crete swarm has fielded thousands of warships. They have already destroyed several of our colonies and killed millions of our citizens. We need a real military force, not a training flotilla." Admiral Okonkwo raised an eyebrow, and something flickered in her eyes that Silithan could not quite identify. "I understand your concern, Coordinator, and I assure you that we take this situation very seriously. My crews may be reserves, but they are fully qualified for combat operations. We will do everything in our power to protect your people." "With 12 ships?" Reth burst out, unable to contain himself. "Against 4,000? This is madness. This is suicide." One of the young humans on the bridge laughed at that, quickly covering his mouth when Admiral Okonkwo shot him a warning look. But Silithan had seen the amusement spreading among the other crew members as well, and she did not understand it at all. "Commander Vreth raises a valid point," she said carefully. "The numbers are not in your favor, Admiral. Perhaps you should contact your superiors and request additional support." Admiral Okonkwo leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "Coordinator, I have been fighting in one war or another for over 40 years. I have commanded ships against pirates, rebels, rogue AI, and 3 separate alien invasions. I have never once requested backup that I did not absolutely need." She paused and her expression softened slightly. "I know how this looks. You asked for help, and we sent you a handful of old ships with a crew of instructors and cadets. You probably think we are either incompetent or cruel, but I am asking you to trust me." "Trust you?" Silithan repeated. "My people are dying, Admiral. Every hour that passes, more of them die. How can I trust you when you bring so little to this fight?" Admiral Okonkwo stood up from her chair and walked closer to the view screen, her eyes locking with Silithan's compound gaze. Coordinator, let me tell you something about humans. We have a long history of fighting things that should have killed us. We have faced predators larger than ourselves, diseases that wiped out half our population, ice ages, meteor strikes, and centuries of bloody warfare against each other. We survived all of it, not because we were the strongest or the fastest, but because we simply refused to die. She placed her hand over her heart. These 12 ships may be old, but they are crewed by humans. And humans, Coordinator, are very hard to kill. Point us at your enemy, and let us show you what we can do. Silithan wanted to argue more, wanted to demand better forces, wanted to scream at the unfairness of it all. But she had no other options, and no more time. Very well, Admiral, she said at last. I will trust you. Please do not make me regret that decision. Admiral Okonkwo smiled, and this time there was something almost predatory in the expression. You will not regret it, Coordinator. I promise you that. The communication ended, and Silithan turned to face Vreth with exhaustion weighing down every limb. Prepare our civilian populations for evacuation, she ordered. If the humans fail, we must be ready to flee. Vreth nodded and hurried away to carry out her commands, leaving Silithan alone with her thoughts and her fears and the terrible certainty that she had just placed her species. Survival in the hands of 12 aging warships and a gray-haired admiral who smiled too much. The Kreeth would arrive within days. And when they came, Silithan would learn whether the humans were saviors or simply well-meaning fools who had come to die alongside the Volanti. The Kreeth vanguard arrived 2 days later, and they came in numbers that made Silithan's blood run cold. 400 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel near the colony world of Thesserfor, their black organic hulls blotting out the stars like a spreading disease. 16 million Volanti civilians lived on that world, and they had nowhere to run and no way to defend themselves. Silithan watched the tactical display in the command center, her compound eyes fixed on the swarm of red dots representing enemy vessels. Beside her, Commander Vreth stood in grim silence, and around them the Volanti officers whispered prayers to gods who seemed very far away. The human fleet is moving to intercept, one of the sensor officers reported in a shaking voice. On the display, 12 small green dots began accelerating toward the mass of red. It looked like watching insects fly into a furnace. They are actually doing it, Vreth breathed. They are actually attacking 400 ships with only 12. This is not bravery, Coordinator. This is insanity. Silithan did not respond because she could not find any words that fit the situation. She had prepared a eulogy in her mind, a speech to honor the brave humans who had come to die alongside her people. She expected to deliver it within the hour. Admiral Okonkwo's voice crackled over the communication channel, calm and almost casual. 3rd Reserve Fleet engaging the enemy. All ships, execute pattern Sigma 7. Let us show these bugs how humans dance. What happened next would haunt Silithan's dreams for the rest of her life. The 12 human ships did not fly in formation like any military force she had ever seen. Instead, they scattered in seemingly random directions, splitting apart like seeds blown by the wind. The Kreeth warships tried to target them, but the humans moved too fast and too unpredictably. Then the humans started shooting. Beams of brilliant light lanced out from the human vessels, cutting through Kreeth hulls like hot knives through soft butter. Explosions blossomed across the enemy formation as ship after ship came apart in balls of fire and debris. The humans wove between the Kreeth vessels, dodging return fire with movements that should have been impossible for ships their size. What am I seeing? Vreth stammered. Those maneuvers should tear their ships apart from the acceleration forces alone. But the human ships did not tear apart. They twisted and spun and dived through the enemy fleet, firing constantly, leaving trails of destruction in their wake. The Kreeth tried to regroup, tried to concentrate their fire on single targets, but the humans refused to let them. One of the training corvettes, a small vessel named Stumbling Block, found itself surrounded by 5 Kreeth destroyers. Instead of retreating, the corvette accelerated directly at the nearest enemy ship. "They are going to ram them," Silithan gasped. The Stumbling Block hit the Kreeth destroyer at incredible speed, punching through the organic hull and emerging from the other side trailing fire and debris. But it did not stop there. The battered corvette immediately opened fire on the next destroyer, its weapons still functioning despite damage that should have crippled any normal vessel. Over the communication channel, Silithan could hear the human crew laughing. Actually laughing, as if this were a game rather than a desperate battle for survival. "Cadet Williams, that approach was sloppy," a stern voice barked. "Line up your shots properly." "Aye, sir." "Sorry, sir. Recalibrating targeting systems now, sir." "Petrov, you are drifting too far from the formation. Pull back and cover Chun's flank." "Copy that, Admiral." Moving to support position. They were treating this like a training exercise. While fighting for their lives against overwhelming odds, the humans were still teaching their students proper combat technique. The HFY Perseverance moved through the center of the Kreeth formation like an angry predator, its old hull absorbing hits that should have torn it apart. Silithan watched in amazement as blast after blast struck the human flagship, and each time the ship shrugged off the damage and kept fighting. "How is that possible?" Vreth demanded. "Our scans showed their armor was outdated. Those weapons should be tearing them to pieces. But the Perseverance would not die. Its weapons blazed without pause, destroying Kreeth vessels with almost casual precision." Admiral Okonkwo's voice remained steady throughout, issuing orders and corrections as if she were conducting a symphony rather than a battle. The Kreeth began to retreat. Silithan could not believe her own eyes. The invincible swarm, the terror that had destroyed worlds and killed billions, was running away from 12 old human ships. But the humans did not let them escape easily. They pursued the fleeing enemy, picking off stragglers and destroying any vessel that moved too slowly. By the time the Kreeth finally escaped into faster-than-light travel, their vanguard of 400 ships had been reduced to barely 160. 238 Kreeth warships destroyed by 12 human vessels. The command center had gone completely silent. Every Volanti officer stared at the tactical display with expressions of shock and disbelief. Some of them had tears streaming from their compound eyes. "Casualties?" Silithan whispered. Commander Vreth checked the data 3 times before answering. The humans lost 1 ship, the corvette Brave Mistake. But they had already evacuated the crew to sister vessels before the ship was destroyed. Human casualties appeared to be minimal. 1 ship lost. 1 ship against 238. Admiral Okonkwo's face appeared on the view screen, and Silithan saw that the human woman had a small cut on her forehead that was bleeding freely. But she was smiling, genuinely smiling, as if she had just completed a pleasant afternoon activity. "Coordinator, the enemy vanguard has been neutralized. Desser 4 is secure for now. We will need to establish a patrol perimeter in case they return with reinforcements." "Admiral," Silithan managed to say, "what did I just witness?" Okonkwo wiped the blood from her forehead with the back of her hand. "That was called combat, Coordinator. It is a human specialty." "But how?" "Your ships are old. Your crews are trainees. How did you defeat a force 30 times your size?" The Admiral's smile faded slightly, replaced by something more thoughtful. "Coordinator, would you like to know a secret about humans?" "Yes, please. We are afraid of ourselves," Okonkwo said quietly. "We have spent thousands of years fighting each other, developing weapons to kill each other, building defenses to survive each other. Every ship in this fleet was designed to fight against human opponents. And humans, Coordinator, are much harder to kill than the Kreeth. She paused and looked directly into the view screen. You asked our command for help, and they sent you the 3rd Reserve Fleet. Do you know why they did not send a frontline force? Silithan shook her head. Because a frontline force would have been excessive. Admiral Okonkwo said. Our command looked at the Kreeth threat assessment and decided that sending our best ships would be like using a star-killing bomb to swat an insect. We reserves were considered an appropriate response. A proportional response. The words hit Silithan like a physical blow. The humans had not sent their weakest fleet out of neglect or incompetence. They had sent their weakest fleet because they genuinely believed it would be enough. And they had been right. Coordinator, I suggest you get some rest, Admiral Okonkwo said gently. The Kreeth will regroup and return with larger forces. When they do, we will be ready for them. But for now, your people on Desert 4 are safe. The view screen went dark, and Silithan sank into her chair, her mind struggling to process everything she had witnessed. She had called the humans because she thought they were violent monsters. Now she realized that she had been right about their violence, but completely wrong about what it meant. The humans were monsters, yes, but they were monsters who had chosen to protect the innocent. And the Kreeth had no idea what was coming for them. The weeks that followed the first battle were unlike anything the Volanthi had ever experienced, and Silithan found herself learning more about humans than she had ever wanted to know. Admiral Okonkwo established a defensive perimeter around the core Volanthi worlds, positioning her 11 remaining ships at strategic points where they could respond quickly to any threat. The Kreeth tested these defenses again and again, sending raiding parties and scout fleets to probe for weaknesses. They found none. Every Kreeth attack ended the same way, with human ships tearing through enemy formations like predators among prey. The 3rd Reserve Fleet became a legend among the Volanthi people, and stories of their impossible victories spread from world to world. Children began playing games where they pretended to be human warriors, and artists created paintings depicting the Perseverance surrounded by burning enemy vessels. But Silithan was not satisfied with simply watching the humans fight. She needed to understand them, to comprehend how such a small force could accomplish such incredible feats. So she requested a meeting with Admiral Okonkwo aboard the Perseverance, and the human commander agreed. The human ship was nothing like Silithan had expected. She had imagined cold metal corridors and harsh lighting and the constant smell of weapons discharge. Instead, she found warm but comfortable hallways decorated with photographs and personal items. And she heard music playing softly from crew quarters. And she smelled something delicious cooking in a room the humans called a mess hall. Admiral Okonkwo met her in a small conference room and offered her a cup of dark liquid that smelled bitter and strong. It is called coffee, the Admiral explained. Humans run on the stuff. Would you like to try some? Silithan politely declined and settled into a chair that had been modified to accommodate her insectoid anatomy. She studied the human woman across the table, noting the lines on her face and the gray in her hair and the calm confidence in her eyes. Admiral, I have come to ask questions that may seem rude, Silithan began. But I need to understand your people if I am to work with them effectively. Ask whatever you like, Coordinator. I have nothing to hide. How are you doing this? Silithan asked. Your ships are old and your crews are trainees, and yet you defeat enemies that outnumber you 30-1. It should not be possible. Admiral Okonkwo took a long sip of her coffee before answering. Coordinator, do you know how humans became the dominant species on our homeworld? I do not. We were not the fastest animals on Earth. We were not the strongest. We did not have sharp teeth or claws or armor. We were soft and slow and weak compared to the predators that hunted us. The Admiral set down her cup and leaned forward. But we had two advantages that no other species possessed. What advantages? Endurance and stubbornness, Okonkwo said with a slight smile. Humans can walk and run for longer than almost any other creature on Earth. Our ancestors would hunt by simply following prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. And when something hurt us, we did not run away and hide. We got angry and found ways to hurt it back. She stood and walked to a display screen on the wall, activating it to show images of human history. Silithan saw primitive humans hunting massive beasts with simple spears. Then later, humans riding horses into battle with swords raised. Then humans in metal vehicles firing weapons that shot fire. Then humans in spacecraft carrying bombs that could destroy entire cities. We've spent our entire existence fighting things that wanted to kill us, Okonkwo continued. Animals, diseases, natural disasters, and most of all each other. We have had thousands of years of practice at warfare, coordinator. We have made it into an art form. But why do you fight each other? Silithan asked, genuinely confused. You are one species. Should you not work together? The Admiral laughed, but there was sadness in the sound. You would think so, would you not? But humans are complicated creatures. We form groups, and those groups compete with other groups. We fight over resources, over ideas, over pride, over things so small that they seem absurd in hindsight. Our history is written in blood. She turned back to face Silithan. That is why we are so good at war, coordinator. We designed our weapons to kill humans. We built our defenses to survive human attacks. Everything about our military technology was created to fight the most dangerous enemy we know, ourselves. And the Kreeth? Silithan asked. The Kreeth are dangerous, Okonkwo admitted. But they are not humans. They do not adapt the way we do. They do not learn from their mistakes the way we do. They do not fight with the desperate creativity that humans bring to battle. She paused and her expression grew thoughtful. Coordinator, when I look at the Kreeth, I see predators. But I have faced human predators, and the Kreeth do not compare. Silithan processed this information slowly, trying to fit it into her understanding of the universe. You are saying that your species' greatest weakness, your tendency toward violence, has become your greatest strength. Exactly. Admiral Okonkwo returned to her seat. Every atrocity we committed against ourselves taught us something. Every war we fought gave us new weapons and new tactics. We climbed to the stars on a ladder built from our own worst impulses. And now that we have reached the galaxy, we are trying very hard to be better. Better? We do not want to be the monsters anymore, coordinator. We have seen what monsters do because we have been them. So now we try to use our talents for good, to protect rather than destroy, to save rather than kill. The Admiral's eyes met Silithan's compound gaze. That is why we came when you called. Not because we wanted territory or resources or power. We came because helping others is the only way we can live with ourselves. A heavy silence filled the room as Silithan contemplated the Admiral's words. She had spent her whole life believing that violence was a primitive impulse that civilized species outgrew. Now she wondered if she had been wrong, if perhaps violence was simply a tool that could be used for good or evil, depending on who wielded it. Admiral, I have one more question, she said finally. Ask it. Your command sent you because they considered you an appropriate response to the Kreeth threat. But what would they send if you failed? What would happen if the Kreeth proved too strong even for the 3rd Reserve Fleet? Admiral Okonkwo was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was softer than before. Coordinator, there are weapons in our vaults that we created during our darkest centuries. Planet killers, star snuffers, reality warpers. Things so terrible that we locked them away and swore never to use them. She looked down at her hands. If we failed and the Kreeth threatened human space, those weapons would be unleashed. And when the fire finally stopped burning, there would be no more Kreeth. There would be no more anything in this part of the galaxy. She looked up again, and her eyes were haunted. That is what we are capable of, Coordinator. That is what we are trying to be better than. So please, let us win this war the gentle way. Let us prove that humans can protect without destroying. Because the alternative is something that nobody should ever have to see. Silithan shivered despite the warmth of the room. She had asked to understand humans, and now she did. They were not monsters. They were something far more complicated and far more terrifying. They were monsters who had chosen to become heroes. And she prayed that choice would never be tested beyond its limits. The final battle came on a morning when the stars themselves seemed to hold their breath, and Silithan knew that everything her people had ever been would be decided in the next few hours. The Kreeth had gathered every ship they had left, pulling forces from across their invaded territories and forming the largest fleet Silithan had ever seen. 2,000 warships hung in the darkness beyond the Volanti homeworld, their black organic hulls blocking out entire constellations. Among them moved 5 massive queen carriers, each one the size of a small moon, each one containing the breeding chambers that could spawn millions of new Kreeth warriors. And in the center of that terrible armada floated something that made Silithan's blood freeze in her veins. A world cracker, a weapon designed to shatter planets into rubble and ash. The Kreeth had decided that if they could not conquer the Volanti, they would simply erase them from existence. They have committed everything, Commander Vreth reported, his voice hollow with despair. This is not just an invasion force. This is their entire civilization coming to destroy us. Silithan stood at the window of the command center, watching the distant sparkle of enemy ships. Behind her, the city spread across the hills, filled with billions of her people who had nowhere left to run. If the humans failed today, there would be no tomorrow for the Volanti. Admiral Okonkwo's face appeared on the view screen, and Silithan was surprised to see that the human woman looked almost sad. Coordinator, I have to be honest with you, the Admiral said quietly. This is beyond what we can handle with conventional tactics. I have 11 ships, and they have 2,000. Even humans have limits. What are you saying? Silithan asked, her heart sinking. I am saying that I need to request permission to escalate. Escalate? The Admiral took a deep breath. Coordinator, every human warship carries weapons that we are not supposed to use except in the most extreme circumstances. Things we developed during our worst wars. Things designed to fight enemies that could destroy our entire species. She paused. I have been fighting this campaign with one arm tied behind my back. If you give me permission, I will untie it. Silithan remembered their conversation about the terrible weapons locked in human vaults, and she felt fear crawl up her spine. But she also remembered the burning colonies and the dead millions and the 16 million civilians still alive on the world below. Do what you must, Admiral, she said. Save my people. Okonkwo nodded slowly. Understood, Coordinator. I want you to know that I take no pleasure in this. But some threats cannot be answered with kindness. The view screen went dark, and Silithan turned back to the window to watch humanity reveal its true face. The 11 human ships moved forward to meet the Kreeth armada, tiny specks of light against an ocean of darkness. But as they advanced, something began to change. Ports and hatches opened along their hulls, revealing weapons that Silithan had never seen before. Strange energy crackled along their surfaces, and space itself seemed to bend around them. The Perseverance led the charge, its old hull now glowing with power that should have been impossible for a ship its age. Admiral Okonkwo had been telling the truth. They had been holding back. The Kreeth attacked first, launching thousands of missiles and energy beams at the approaching human fleet. Any sane military force would have been vaporized in seconds. But the human ships did not die. They activated shields that swallowed the incoming fire like water pouring into a bottomless well. And then they returned fire. The Perseverance unleashed its main weapon, a beam of pure white light that stretched across the void and struck the largest queen carrier. The massive vessel simply ceased to exist, erased from reality as if it had never been. Not destroyed, not exploded, just gone. Gravity lances reached out from the smaller human ships, folding Kreeth warships in on themselves like paper crushed in a giant fist. Quantum disruptors tore holes in the fabric of space, swallowing dozens of enemy vessels at once. Weapons that Silithan could not even comprehend lit up the darkness, turning the Kreeth armada into a graveyard. The Kreeth tried to fight back, tried to overwhelm the humans with sheer numbers, but nothing they did mattered. Their weapons could not penetrate the human shields. Their ships could not escape the human targeting systems. They were prey, nothing more, being harvested by predators beyond their understanding. 9 minutes. That was how long the battle lasted. In 9 minutes, 2,000 Kreeth warships became dust and memory. In 9 minutes, 5 queen carriers were erased from existence. In 9 minutes, the World Cracker was torn apart by gravity lances and scattered across 1 billion kilometers of empty space. When the firing stopped, the Volanthi homeworld was surrounded by a field of glittering debris that would take centuries to clear. The Kreeth swarm was functionally extinct. An entire civilization gone in less time than it took to drink a cup of coffee. Silithan stood frozen at the window, unable to speak or move or think. She had asked the humans for help, and they had delivered. But the cost of that help was knowledge she could never unlearn. Admiral Okonkwo's face appeared on the view screen one final time. The human woman looked tired and old, and her eyes held the weight of what she had done. "It is over, Coordinator," she said softly. "The Kreeth homeworld coordinates have been transmitted to our command for monitoring. They will surrender within the year, or they will cease to exist entirely. Your people are safe." "Admiral," Silithan managed to whisper. "What did I just witness?" "You witnessed humanity being efficient," Okonkwo replied. "I'm sorry you had to see it." Silithan gathered her courage and asked a question that had been burning in her mind since their first meeting. "Admiral, if this was your weakest fleet using restricted weapons, what are your strongest fleets capable of?" The silence stretched between them like a chasm. When Okonkwo finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Coordinator, our strongest fleets have weapons that make what you saw today look like children throwing stones. They have the power to unmake suns and rewrite the laws of physics. They exist because during our darkest centuries, we feared ourselves more than we have ever feared anything else." She closed her eyes. "We do not use those weapons. We do not even speak of them, because some answers should not exist, not even for existential questions." She opened her eyes and met Silithan's gaze. "Be grateful you only needed the reserve fleet. Be grateful the galaxy never has to learn what humanity is truly capable of when we stop being merciful." The view screen went dark for the last time, and Silithan sank to her knees on the cold floor of the command center. Around her, Volanthi officers wept with relief and terror. Joy and horror mixed together in a storm of emotion. The stars burned cold and eternal overhead, and Silithan finally understood what it meant to stand beside apex predators who had chosen to be kind. The humans were not heroes or villains, not saviors or destroyers. They were simply the most dangerous thing the universe had ever produced, a species of monsters who had looked at what they were and decided to become something better. And as long as they kept making that choice, the galaxy could sleep safely under their terrible protection. The war was over. The Volanthi would survive. And somewhere out among the stars, 12 old ships and their exhausted crews began the long journey home, carrying with them the burden of power that no species should ever have to bear. They had come as strangers and would leave as legends. And the galaxy would never forget the day the humans sent their weakest fleet